The Miami heat was oppressive, a humid blanket that stuck to the skin and made the air shimmer above the asphalt of Brickell Avenue. It was rush hour, and the city was a gridlock of luxury cars, impatient horns, and the distant thrum of heavy bass from club speakers. Officer Elena Ramirez sat in her cruiser, the air conditioning blasting against the sweat on her neck, watching the traffic with tired eyes. She was 28, a rookie on the tactical response team, trying to prove she belonged in a precinct dominated by older, cynical men. Her partner, Miller, was inside the bodega grabbing coffee, leaving her alone with the crackle of the police radio. The radio chatter was mundane, a domestic dispute in Hialeah, a fender bender on I-95, the usual symphony of a city that never really slept. Down the street, the sound of engines cut through the urban noise, a deep, synchronized roar that turned heads on the sidewalk. It wasn't the high-pitched whine of sport bikes. It was the thunderous growl of custom, heavy-duty machines. A phalanx of 10 motorcycles weaved through the stopped traffic with practiced precision, moving like a single organism. At the front of the pack rode Julian Thorne. He didn't look like a typical outlaw. He looked like money wrapped in leather. He rode a custom arch motorcycle, worth more than most people's houses, and his cut was tailored from Italian leather, fitting over a silk dress shirt. Julian was a legend in Miami, but a polarizing one. He was a billionaire real estate developer whose skyline towers defined the city. But he was also the president of the Iron Scepter, an exclusive motorcycle club rumored to have ties to everything from underground gambling to high-stakes smuggling. He was untouchable, a man who dined with senators and rode with felons. Elena watched them in her rearview mirror, her hand instinctively drifting near the radio. The club wasn't breaking any laws at the moment, but their presence always put the department on edge. Julian stopped his bike at the red light right next to her cruiser, his dark visor reflecting the flashing lights of the city. He turned his head slowly, acknowledging the cop car with a tilt of his helmet. Elena couldn't see his eyes, but she felt the weight of his gaze. It was a stare that dissected you, calculated your worth, and moved on. It was the arrogance of a man who owned the pavement he rode on. Rich boys playing gangster, Miller grunted as he got back into the car, slamming the bar and handing Elena a coffee. He gestured at the bikers. Thorne thinks he's above the law just because he pays half the city's property taxes. He hasn't done anything. Miller, Elena said, taking the cup. Just riding. Give it time, Miller muttered. Men like that always crash eventually. The light turned green. Julian gunned his engine, the bike leaping forward with terrifying speed, leaving the police cruiser in a cloud of exhaust. The rest of his pack followed, a stream of chrome and black leather disappearing toward the financial district. Elena watched them go, feeling a strange unease in her stomach. It wasn't the bikers that worried her. It was the feeling that the day was holding its breath. The heat was too intense, the air too thick. Suddenly, the radio screamed to life, shattering the mundane afternoon. All units, shots fired, 1,200 block of Brickell. Automatic weapons, officer down. Repeat, officer down. Miller dropped his coffee. Elena threw the car into gear, sirens wailing as she peeled out into traffic. The calm was over. The destination was only 3 blocks away. As they sped toward the chaos, the sound of gunfire grew louder, echoing off the glass skyscrapers like thunder in a canyon. Elena gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She didn't know it yet, but the man she had just watched ride away was about to become the most important person in her life. The scene was a war zone. A black SUV had crashed into an armored bank truck, and 4 men in tactical gear were exchanging fire with the initial responding officers. The air was filled with the acrid smell of burnt rubber and gunpowder, and the noise was deafening. Elena skidded the cruiser to a halt behind a parked bus, using it as cover. She and Miller bailed out, weapons drawn, crouching low as bullets sparked off the pavement around them. The robbers were pinned down but heavily armed, spraying the street with assault rifles that outmatched the police's sidearms. "Move up, move up," a sergeant yelled from behind a concrete planter. "We need to flank them." Elena's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic rhythm of survival. She moved tactically, darting from the bus to a mailbox, trying to get a clear line of sight. Civilians were screaming, scrambling for cover in shops and behind cars, adding to the chaotic visual noise. She saw a woman frozen in the middle of the street, clutching a shopping bag, paralyzed by fear. One of the gunmen turned his weapon toward the open road. Elena didn't think. She reacted. "Get down!" Elena screamed, breaking her cover to sprint toward the woman. She tackled the civilian, knocking her behind the wheel, of a parked sedan, just as a burst of gunfire chewed up the asphalt where she had been standing. "Stay down," Elena ordered, her voice cracking. She popped up to return fire, squeezing off 2 rounds at the SUV. The gunman spotted her. He shifted his aim. Elena saw the muzzle flash, a bright star in the daylight. It felt like being punched by a sledgehammer. The bullet caught her in the upper thigh, just below her vest and above her tactical belt. The impact spun her around, and she collapsed onto the hard, hot road. Pain didn't come immediately. It was just a cold shock, a sudden disconnect between her brain and her leg. She looked down and saw the bright red blood pulsing out of her uniform pants, soaking the gray asphalt black. "Officer down. Ramirez is down." Miller's voice screamed over the radio, sounding tinny and far away. Elena tried to crawl, but her leg wouldn't work. She dragged herself a few inches, leaving a smear of crimson behind her. The gunfire continued to rage above her head, suppressing the other officers who tried to reach her. She was in no man's land, exposed in the middle of the street, bleeding out while her colleagues were pinned down by suppressive fire. Her vision began to blur at the edges, the bright Miami sun turning into a hazy white tunnel. She reached for her tourniquet, but her hands were slippery with her own blood. Her fingers fumbled, losing grip. The strength was draining out of her with every beat of her heart. She lay back, staring up at the blue sky framed by towering skyscrapers. It was a beautiful day to die, she thought vaguely. The noise of the battle seemed to drift away, replaced by a buzzing in her ears. Then, through the haze, she heard a different sound. Not gunfire, not sirens. It was the roar of engines. The vibration traveled through the ground and into her back. The iron scepter had circled back. Julian Thorne had heard the gunfire from 2 blocks away. Most civilians would have ridden in the opposite direction, fleeing the danger. Most motorcycle clubs would have scattered to avoid police scrutiny. But Julian wasn't most men, and this was his city. He signaled his pack to halt. They stopped in a V formation at the intersection overlooking the ambush. From his vantage point, Julian could see the stalemate, the pinned police, the aggressive shooters, and the lone female officer bleeding out in the kill zone. He recognized the cruiser number. It was the rookie who had looked at him at the light. He saw the pool of blood expanding rapidly around her. She had minutes, maybe seconds. The police SWAT team was minutes away. The officers on the scene were too suppressed to move without getting cut to pieces. The robbers were focused on the police line, ignoring the bikers on the periphery. Julian made a calculation. It was a risk assessment he ran every day in business, but this time the currency was life. He flipped his kickstand up. "Boss!" His VP, a large man named Tiny, shouted over the idling engines. "We need to bounce. This is heat we don't need." "Stay here," Julian commanded through his helmet. "Comes. Block the intersection. Nobody comes through until I say so." Julian revved his engine, the sound a defiant scream. He dropped the clutch and launched the bike forward. He didn't ride away from the fight. He rode directly into it. He wove through the stalled cars, mounting the sidewalk to bypass the police barricade. The officers shouted at him to stop, but they were too busy dodging bullets to physically impede him. He rode straight into the line of fire. The gunman, confused by this new variable, a lunatic on a motorcycle charging them, paused for a split second. That hesitation was all Julian needed. He skidded the massive bike sideways, using the machine itself as a shield between the gunman and Alina. The heavy metal of the engine block offered more protection than a car door. Bullets pingled off the chrome and the gas tank, sending sparks flying. Julian killed the engine and leapt off the bike in one fluid motion. He crouched behind the machine, ignoring the dents appearing in his $40,000 custom paint job. He looked down at Alina. She was pale, her eyes rolling back, her lips moving silently. The blood loss was catastrophic. The femoral artery was likely nicked. "Stay with me," Julian growled, his voice calm amidst the chaos. He reached for her, his hands expensive and manicured, now hovering over the gory mess of her leg. He realized he didn't have a medical kit on his belt. He was dressed for a board meeting, not a battlefield. He looked at his jacket, a custom, bespoke leather piece worth thousands. He didn't hesitate. He stripped the jacket off, the silk lining gleaming in the sun. He grabbed the sleeve and ripped it with a savage strength, tearing the fine material into strips. "This is going to hurt," Julian told her. He didn't offer comfort. He offered reality. He wrapped the leather sleeve around her upper thigh, high and tight. He used a heavy silver pen from his pocket as a windlass, twisting the fabric until it bit deep into her flesh, cutting off the flow. Alina screamed, a guttural sound that was lost in the noise of the gunfight. But the scream meant she was alive. It meant she was fighting. Julian knelt over her, his body shielding her from the chaos. He held the makeshift tourniquet tight with one hand and used his other hand to apply direct pressure to the wound. His white dress shirt was instantly stained crimson, the blood soaking through the Egyptian cotton. "Look at me," Julian commanded. He removed his helmet, tossing it aside. His face was exposed, sharp jawline, intense dark eyes, and sweat beading on his forehead. "Look at me, officer." Alina focused on him. Her vision was blurry, but she saw his face. It was the billionaire. The man from the magazines. The man her partner called a criminal. He was ruining a shirt that cost more than her monthly salary to save her. "Thorne," she whispered, the name bubbling up with blood. "That's right," Julian said, his eyes scanning the street for the shooters. "Don't you die on me. It's bad for property values." It was a grim joke, spoken with a tight jaw. The gunfire began to taper off. The SWAT team had arrived on the far side, flanking the gunman. The robbers were now fighting for their own lives, their attention drawn away from the wounded officer and the biker. Miller, Elena's partner, saw the break in the fire. He sprinted from behind the bus, sliding into cover behind Julian's bike. He had his gun drawn, pointed initially at Julian. "Get away from her," Miller shouted, adrenaline making him irrational. He saw a biker over his partner and assumed the worst. "Put that gun down, you idiot," Julian barked, not looking up, keeping the pressure on the wound. "I'm holding her artery closed. You shoot me, she bleeds out in 30 seconds. Miller froze, seeing the blood on Julian's hands, seeing the tourniquet made of expensive leather. The cognitive dissonance paralyzed him. This was the enemy, saving his friend. "Help me lift her," Julian ordered, taking command. "We need to get her behind the armored truck. My bike won't hold forever." Miller holstered his weapon, shamed into action. "Okay. On 3. 1, 2, 3. They lifted Elena together. Julian took her shoulders, Miller took her legs. They moved low and fast, dragging her 10 feet to the solid cover of the armored bank truck's rear wheel. Julian didn't let go of the leg. He sat on the dirty pavement, cradling the wound, his expensive pants ruining in the oil and blood. He kept the pressure constant, his muscles straining. "Where is the ambulance?" Julian yelled at Miller. "She's crashing. They can't get through." Miller yelled back, pointing down the street. "The traffic is gridlocked. The perimeter is too tight." Julian looked down the street. A wall of cars and gackers blocked the path of the approaching EMS unit. The sirens were wailing, but they weren't moving. Julian grabbed his radio from his belt, the encrypted channel he used for the club. He pressed the button with a bloody thumb. "Tiny," Julian said, his voice cold and authoritative. "Clear the road. I don't care how you do it. Move the cars. If they don't move, smash them. Get that ambulance to me now." "On it, boss," the voice crackled back. Down the block, the roar of 10 motorcycles revved simultaneously. The Iron Scepter went to work. The crowd watching from the sidewalks witnessed something unprecedented. The bikers, usually seen as a nuisance or a threat, became a brute force traffic control unit. Tiny and the rest of the pack dismounted. They didn't ask drivers to move, they ordered them. Big men in cuts tapped on windows, pointing to the curb. When a taxi refused to budge, Tiny kicked the bumper, grabbed the driver's mirror, and physically guided the car onto the sidewalk. They formed a wedge, forcing a path through the gridlock. They moved concrete barriers. They intimidated gawkers into fleeing. It was aggressive, it was illegal, and it was absolutely effective. Within 90 seconds, a lane opened up in the center of Brickell Avenue. The ambulance, which had been stuck for 5 minutes, gunned its engine and shot through the gap created by the outlaw bikers. Back at the armored truck, Elena was fading. Her skin was gray, her breathing shallow. She gripped Julian's bloody wrist with surprising strength. "Why?" she whispered. Her eyes were searching his. Julian looked down at her. He didn't have a good answer. He had spent his life building walls, accumulating wealth, and keeping the world at arm's length. Why did he stop? "Because you were alone," Julian said quietly. "Nobody should die alone on the pavement." The ambulance screeched to a halt nearby. The paramedics bailed out, carrying their gear. They rushed to the scene, expecting to push a civilian aside. "I have a tourniquet applied. High thigh," Julian briefed them like a trauma surgeon. "Arterial bleed. Estimated blood loss, 2 pints. Pressure held for 6 minutes. The lead medic looked at Julian. The blood-soaked dress shirt, the intense demeanor. He nodded, accepting the handover. "Okay, let go on 3. We'll clamp." Julian released the pressure. The medics swarmed in, packing the wound, staring 4 lines, loading her onto the stretcher. It was a whirlwind of professional activity. As they lifted her up, Elena tried to turn her head to find him. But Julian was already stepping back, fading into the background. He wiped his bloody hands on his pants, his face unreadable. A police captain approached Julian. It was Captain Reynolds, a man who had tried to indict Julian for years. Reynolds looked at the ruined custom motorcycle, the blood on Julian's hands, and the ambulance speeding away. "Thorne," Reynolds said, his voice stiff, "you crossed a police line. You interfered with a crime scene. You ordered your men to vandalize vehicles to move traffic." Julian lit a cigarette. His hands steady despite the adrenaline. He exhaled smoke toward the sky. "Send me the bill, Captain. I'll have my lawyers cut a check in the morning." "You could be arrested," Reynolds warned, though his heart wasn't in it. "You could arrest me," Julian agreed. "But then you'd have to explain to the press why you arrested the man who just saved your officer's life while your SWAT team was still putting their boots on." Reynolds stared at him. He knew he was beaten. "Get your bike out of here, Julian, before I change my mind." Julian nodded. He walked back to his Arch motorcycle, which was riddled with bullet impacts on the tank and fender. He straddled the machine, the engine coughing to life, wounded but functional. The story broke within the hour. The local news had helicopter footage of the billionaire biker tearing his jacket to bind the officer's wound. Social media exploded with videos of the Iron Scepter clearing the traffic jam, hero or vigilante. The headlines screamed. The city was divided. Some called it a PR stunt. Others called it a miracle. Elena survived surgery. The doctors said the tourniquet saved her leg, and the speed of the ambulance saved her life. She woke up in the ICU 2 days later, groggy and weak, her room filled with flowers from the department. Miller sat by her bed. "You're a celebrity, Ramirez," he joked weakly. "Everyone wants an interview. Where is he?" Elena asked. She didn't mean the captain, Thorne. Miller sighed. "He vanished. Back to his penthouse. Haven't seen a hide nor hair of him, though. There is a rumor." "What rumor?" "The Police Benevolent Fund. You know, the one that pays for rehab and supports families of injured cops." Miller lowered his voice. "They received an anonymous donation yesterday. $5 million. Elena's eyes widened. $5 million. Yeah. The wire transfer came from a shell company in the Caymans, but the timestamp was right after you got out of surgery. The memo line just said, 'for better armor.'" Elena looked out the window at the Miami skyline. She saw the Thorne Tower rising above the rest, a monolith of glass and steel. That night, alone in her hospital room, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept replaying the moment on the asphalt. The way his eyes looked, the strength of his hands, the absolute certainty in his voice. She was a cop. He was a criminal, or at least, a man who walked the line. They were natural enemies. But for 10 minutes in the fire, they had been the only two people in the world. A nurse walked in, carrying a small black box. "This was left at the front desk for you, officer." No name. Elena took the box. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside, nestled on black velvet, was a silver pen. It was heavy, expensive, and engraved with initials. It was the windlass he had used to twist the tourniquet. There was no note, just the pen. A tool of business that had become a tool of survival. Elena gripped the pen. She felt a strange mixture of confusion and gratitude. He hadn't done it for publicity. He hadn't visited for a photo op. He had done it, paid the price, and disappeared. 3 months later, Elena was back on light duty. She walked with a cane, but she was walking. The scar on her leg was a jagged reminder of the day she almost died. She was working a desk shift at the precinct when she saw him again. It wasn't in person. It was on the TV screen in the lobby. Julian Thorne was cutting a ribbon at a new community center in Little Havana, a center he had fully funded. Reporters were shouting questions at him. "Mr. Thorne, Mr. Thorne, is it true you saved the officer? Why did you do it?" Julian stopped. He looked directly into the camera. For a second, Elena felt like he was looking right at her through the screen. "I did what anyone would do," Julian lied smoothly. "I saw a problem, and I fixed it. That's business." He turned and walked away, his security teammen from the motorcycle club flanking him. Elena smiled. She knew it wasn't business. She remembered the look in his eyes when he told her not to die. It wasn't a calculation. It was humanity, raw and terrified, breaking through the veneer of the billionaire. Later that evening, Elena drove her personal car to a bar in Brickale. It was a high-end place, the kind where Julian Thorne was known to hold court. She didn't go in. She just parked across the street. She saw the motorcycles lined up out front. The Iron Scepter was there. She took the silver pen out of her purse. She wrote a note on the back of a napkin, "Thank you for the jacket," and the leg. She walked across the street, ignoring the stares of the bouncers. She walked up to the lead bike, the Arch motorcycle, now repaired and repainted. She tucked the napkin under the clutch cable. She turned and walked away, her cane clicking on the sidewalk. From the balcony above, Julian watched her go. He held a drink in his hand, the smoke of his cigar curling into the night air. He saw her leave the note. He didn't smile, but his eyes softened. "Boss?" Tiny asked from behind him. "Everything good?" "Yeah," Julian said, taking a sip of his whiskey. "Everything's good." The city of Miami continued to spin crime, money, heat, and noise. The lines between the law and the outlaw remained drawn in the sand. But everyone in the precinct, and everyone in the club, knew the truth about that day. They knew that when the fire was hottest, the devil didn't come to collect a soul. He came to save one, and that was a debt that would never be called in. It was simply a legend, written in leather, blood, and of silence between two worlds.